Hey all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon and Brayden, all three of us here for what we do every year, all of the decks, Worlds Preview slash Summerfest Preview Edition. This is part one of two. This is specifically talking about the stuff that is at the top of the meta going into Worlds and Summerfest. We wanted to get this out before Worlds happens. Part two will come out in 2 weeks after Worlds. We'll be talking about the rest of the meta going into Summerfest, but for now, this is the stuff that we think is most relevant in a Worlds environment and in the Trios tournaments that will be coming up this summer. We have 7 sets that we've identified as the top contenders in this current state of things. So we're going to talk about those, and we're going to start with the new stuff. Goddess of Victory Nikke. Probably the biggest wild card coming into this season out of anything. It feels like the list that people are scared of changes by the week. There are right now 3 different lists that are established to be at least relevant. And I think what people feel about all of them kind of varies from person to person more drastically than a lot of this other stuff. So I'm going to kick this over to Brayden because Brayden is actually going to buy into Nikke. What are these 3 archetypes, Brayden, and what are they doing?
Yeah, so on reveal, the big thing that people sort of were drawn to were a lot of these green bar top ends, just because it has some of the most ridiculous finishing numbers that we've seen in a very long time. However, on release in Japan, nobody really was able to get it to work super effectively, just because too many pieces, too many CXs in hand, just too much going on really to get there. Uh, So we'll have to see. It's like this sounds like a very English format deck where we have these super high ceilings, but there's a lot of cost to get there. So I'm expecting to see it. Uh, Japan leaned really hard into the salvage standby list instead, which was basically just this massive advantage engine, uh, which can lean on some really nasty defensive counters at the top. They have both tap +6 soul on the same event counter for incredibly cheap, as well as having access to 3/4 money counter that burns, as well as a character +6 soul counter. So they have plenty of stuff to work with at the top to stay alive. This is a very Japanese style deck for what we see instead of compared to the West. Uh, So we'll expect to see both of these lists played. We have to see and wait and see what actually comes up more frequently, what sees more success, the super consistent utility piece one, or the go for the high roll one. And then in the middle, we also have these X pants lists, these 8 pants lists typically that run this Dorothy finisher with a whole lot of cancel burn, giving soul trigger shot and then stacking that can be really strong. So you can have cancel burn one, cancel burn 3 or cancel burn 1 3 times, cancel burn 1 4 times, stuff like that. Overall, though, the set should be fairly strong. I expect to see quite a bit of it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is doubting that Nikke will be very present in some form. It will be here, it will be important, it will be good. And I think that you speak to an interesting point, and one that's relevant, is Japan is liking the standby list more, which makes sense given what the Japanese meta looks like. But you also mentioned in the English meta, we do like explosive finishers. We do like to try to find ways to make the top end happen, right? Like obviously, Gura and SDS, these decks that have these very high potency finishers moving to the top of the meta and staying there for a long time. So I think the bar list is going to happen. because I think someone's going to fix it. I think someone's going to solve it. This is an aggressive meta with aggressive players. The bar top end has the high ceiling. I think people are going to solve this bar top end, even if this does not become the way that Nikkei is played, right? Even if this is not definitively what Nikkei looks like all the time going forward, there will be a handful of people who are on this bar Nikkei list, and those people will be some of the most dangerous in any given room because they'll know how to make this thing happen. This is a deck that absolutely could potentially reward you. I think the thing that I'm most interested in is to see exactly how the bar list gets solved. The Dorothy package is extremely consistent with its finisher. Just an immediate A tier finisher. Super good at what it does. The standby package also has that really good healer that can increases your hit odds, right? So the the floor is very high for the standby list, and I think the floor is very high for the pants list. Both of them will be relevant. Both of them will be very relevant.
I think this bar list is going to be the best example of a high risk, high reward deck.
I agree with that idea of the high risk, high reward. I think it's going to depend on defensive abilities and how prevalent those are in the mainstream system. One of the things I think that 8 bar list probably struggles with is going to be playing around with some of those defensive things because you have to spend all those resources to get those pieces on field and then get them going, as well as like maintaining and sculpting your hand for it. You don't have a lot of room to be able to finesse the top end and to play around some of those defensive abilities. You might need a little bit more finesse, especially within its own set, right? You have the 3-0 event that kind of pairs into that standby list, and you have the standby list to be able to get that early play in and get the essentially reverses and start stacking the top of your opponent's deck. So if you're playing into that kind of deck, you're going to have a little more uphill battle because you're not going to be able to draw into as effectively those kinds of pieces either.
Because we have different ban lists, the Japanese players cannot actually have a hexproof board with slime, if that's still relevant and still shows up.
English, we can still run the hexproof, which shuts down all of those defensive options. Just a quick thing to keep in mind for those testing the salvage standby list.
So moving on from the thing that is probably the least known quantity among the new sets going into the season to the thing that is most well established, 8 salvage bunny girl. It is what it is. And what it is probably the most consistent deck that's ever come to English. This is the quintessential archetype for 50 good cards on 8 plus ink.
Yeah, it's the 8 salvage list is quite consistent. It's very strong. The only thing that you're like really working through while playing the deck is, can I generate the 4 different memory? Once you achieve that condition, though, it's like the deck pilots very easily. You sit there and play the clean game plan that makes you that rewards you for being for playing good Weiss, maintaining your compression, maintaining your clean stock, and then salvage healer that can go the distance. It being an icy tail is the worst part about it, but the reach is still phenomenal on Mai.
Yeah, this is definitely the most spicy tail we've seen in this format in English, other than Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man, very similar kind of idea. Pay 1, pitch 1. As long as you have 3 or more other characters, put 2 cards from the bottom of your opponent's deck into their waiting room. If there's a climax, burn 2. You do that X times. X is 2. If you have 3 or fewer different cards in your memory, it's 3 if you have 4 or more. So if you get that full memory condition, you get pay 1, pitch 1, icy tail 2 3 times, and every time you hit, you burn 2. Now you max out at 1 climax in the 2 cards. So if you mill 2 off of one of those instances, you only get the burn 2. But still, like, This is going to work pretty often. In terms of the actual damage numbers, it's better Mirin, realistically, because how many climaxes are you going to be out in 18 cards? 5? So we're looking at potentially 5 burn 2s to go with 3 actual swings, plus milling your opponent's entire deck from the bottom. Unbelievably consistent from 3-0. Has the reach to kill from mid-level 2 more so than Chainsaw Man. This feels like the upgraded version of the Chainsaw Man finisher.
Yep, and it just heals on play as well, just as some icing on the cake. The big thing is that the way my ends out playing is that so against something like Chainsaw Man, you wanted to still, like, going against it, you wanted to play like this very strong compression game still. There was no reason to like not still compress, even though Aki would get more burn ones off the Icy Tail. The burn ones are typically not what killed you when in regards to the Aki attacks. If you ate one Aki swing, that's when Aki would actually finish you from like low 3, high level 2, because you ate the swing for 3 or 4. My, on the other hand, works very well even into compressed decks, because it just goes so far with that extra, with the burn 2s. And then even if you eat the swing for 3 or 4, the distance becomes phenomenal. You're looking at like mid to low level 2 kill ranges from triple on certain deck states, while still maintaining great kill pressure on compressed decks as well.
I think this is where the threat range of Bunny Girl is why we kind of see this more towards the top of the meta currently. This is why we see this maybe as like the deck to beat, is because it has such a high threat range that as soon as it gets to level 3, it is very much in threat of closing you out regardless of where you are in the game.
So something that we've referenced a lot going back is the finisher simulation sheet that Diz puts together. We'll link it in the description. One of the things about Spicy Tail, specifically, like these high output Icy Tail combos, is that their consistency from 3-0 is basically untouched by your compression. If you're 8 out of 20, you have a 67% chance of dying. If you're 6 out of 30, you have a 76% chance of dying. Like, that's not a massive difference. By comparison, most things, that difference is much wider, but it's very consistent. It will close you more than half the time from 9 damage unless you are 8 out of 25 or better. And even then, it doesn't dip that much below 50-50. However, once you get to you need to kill from 2-4, from 2-3, the numbers do drop. They don't drop a whole lot based on your compression, but they do drop based on how much damage needs to be done. So this is where, going into Mai, if you have an opportunity to shove Mai into 3 while healing down to 2-4, 2-3, if you can do it, that definitely helps you. That's the best thing you can do. Healing is more important than compression if you're not going to die to Mai. And also worth just noting, Mai does have a 25% chance, even into a good deck state for it, of just not killing you. Like, that is also the Icy Tail problem, is sometimes it just doesn't kill you. It usually will. But I think the thing that maybe the one thing about this deck that gives me a tiny bit of pause, there is that kind of asterisk with Bunny Girl where it's like, there will be games where this just does not work. And if you play 6 rounds and you only have a 75% chance to close from 3-0, there are going to be 1 or 2 of those games where you don't close, and now you need to live from 3-0 as the Bunny Girl player.
Now, luckily, the rest of the deck is also quite competent as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, you do have to pay for almost all your memory in Bunny Girl, so it's not exactly a positive thing to go for, but it still has memory compression. that your opponent usually can't interact with. What I have come to the conclusion of when playing the deck is that if you get extra turns at 1, and you can just roll stock and you get the extra level 1 cancels or something, the deck becomes nearly untouchable. It's almost impossible to stick a 3, just because your deck state's so good in the mid game.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest thing that I've had with the deck is achieving all 4 different memory and having the 7 stock to go for triple finisher. That is at least 11 stock of overhead that you need to go for your full power finisher. You can get there because of the stock generation package, and it's not hard to get there, but that's not where I think the strength of this deck lies. A lot of it lies in a consistent mid 0, 1, 2. I'd say that the 0 game is probably the weakest part of this deck, which is kind of unique for stuff that we've seen recently.
I agree with that. Fully. People are going to focus on the finisher, like we've been mostly talking about the finisher, but you're right. The level 1 game is nauseatingly consistent. And you also get the benefit of top check 3 add anything, which for my money is one of the best level 1 combos you can have. It adds climax, it adds events, it adds whatever. Your opponent doesn't know what you got, so your opponent is blind as to what's in your hand. I think that's very powerful. I think it has a suite of interesting tools to play as well. If you're playing into 8 Salvage Bunny Girl, your best bet is early game pressure, right? Because if Bunny Girl gets its level 1 clock compression, and its 4 cards into memory, and its big hand size, and its 7 stock, it's going to be tough to stick those swings at the end. And it actually could, probably better than almost anything else in this meta right now, live from 3-0 into a full finisher board. Not saying that it will, but it has a better chance than most things.
Yep. The only thing this deck currently isn't running is a defensive counter of any kind, really. If anything, it's running maybe 1 anti-change, or I think they have free fresh as well. But a lot of the lists I'm seeing don't focus on defense at all. It's just all gas. There is also a side note. There is a bar level 1 that sometimes people run just for more selection. But it's pretty niche as well. It lets you stack a whole bunch of reverses in a single lane, and it also works from the back row. But we're not going to see that as much as just the full 8 salvage package.
So moving on to quintuplets, 5 different decks that achieved a top 4 after the ban list in BCS, which is nuts. It's nuts that there's a single set that has all of these relevant decks in it. Most important one is going to be 8 Standby Nino. That is the one that saw the most action, saw the most play, got the most results. But each is relevant, and both Miku and Yotsuba will also have their shots to put up results, especially, I think, in a trios format. So 8 Standby, it's very much the same kind of thing as we've seen before. It's just got more consistency pieces now, right? You're still going to see the level 1 combo into the same level 3 combo with the same 2/2s. You get your charm back. So you've got charm that you can play now, so you have a defensive event to play. But Quince is going to get its board, it's going to keep its consistent board, and then it's going to play its competent finisher, which is one of the things that is unique to its version of Standby, is it has a real finisher, and it has a real combo at 1. It's not just a standby enabling thing. You actually get 2+ while also slamming your standby, triggering your standby.
Yep. So yeah, we're seeing, in English, we're seeing at least 2 different mindsets when it comes to the 8 standby list. We have like the full defensive one with the new premium booster set, leaning into those defensive counters super hard. All the lists run defensive counters in the pieces, but the other list that we're seeing is actually running the set 2 finisher standby climax with copies of that 3/2 that gains standby trigger, so effectively 12 standby. But most of them are running the new 2/1 back row with the set 3 global 15. Burn 4 on cancel is going to be good in a standby deck that's winning board. So swinging for 3s, 4s with cancel burn, pay cost burn 4s, as well as just having access to things like heal counter, bracelet, as well as burn counter. They have burn 2 counter. They will attempt to kill you on your own turn. You have to be aware of that. It's the standby deck that's trying to do everything.
Yeah, essentially just getting more consistency tools allows it to be able to, I think, be slightly more relevant because it can put its like initial standby pieces in waiting room initially, so it can help guarantee its standby targets to each level of the game. So it's, I think, made it the most consistent standby deck with potentially the most standbys in it in the active of the most competitive standby decks. So I would argue that you're going to see very much almost the same thing every time at almost every stage of the game because they can make it however they want it to be.
I think that's one of the reasons why it is so consistent. Like, you have 12 triggers in so many of these lists, and standby is already a broken trigger. Getting 4 more of it just means that you are absolutely getting your 1/1s, you're absolutely getting your 2/2s, you're going to get your finisher on the board for free a lot more games just because you're going to rip it. So that level of consistency means that it's very unlikely to whiff its top end. It makes its top end that much less expensive, and it is also a competent top end that also just happens to be on a standby trigger. So it's a very consistent list. It goes about its consistency very differently than, say, an 8 salvage Bunny Girl list. But what it's doing is still maximizing that consistency, just taking it in a different direction. Rest of Quints, don't want to spend too much time on all of these, but we do have the 8 choice list, which is effectively the 12 choice list. Still, for the most part, if I'm not mistaken, playing the 3 different choice combos.
Basically always running 3 CX lists, whether it's 4-3-1 or 4-2-2, and they run the shuffle back to shuffle back those extra choice climaxes.
Still quite a capable finisher, while also getting to play a bit of a power game, getting to play a resource game with the level 3 that comes down early and also combos.
Yep, very good at bouncing your board as well.
Yeah, has a lot of board control, the Ichika list, so it's harder to interact with defensively. So just a very competent list. I don't think it's amazing, but it's very, very competent. It does what it does. It's going to get its game plan more often than it doesn't. And it pays for that a little bit. Like, it doesn't have a super explosive top end, right? It's not going to close you consistently if you're compressed. And obviously, Quint's, like, famously lacking stock swap.
The finisher is actually the least affected by stock swap because it is on cancel and it's shuffle back. I think the biggest weakness with this, though, is that it just loses super hard to anti-change in a format where things like Overlord exists.
So everyone has to have their anti-change.
Everyone needs anti-change in hand, so you kind of just get hurt by that really badly.
Yeah, it has the same problem, effectively the same problem that Kanata does in Hololive, and we'll get to that a little later on. The other list that I want to make mention of, at least, is the 8 salvage list. I mean, this is very much kind of an earlier version of a 50 good cards archetype. it's not as good as some stuff that we're seeing now in the same archetype, but it's still extremely good. Like, I would still argue one of the best level 1 combos in the game, still extremely defendable, right? So it can win board, which allows it to push more damage, and it has a pretty reasonable finisher, right? And it's absolutely possible to triple it despite the expensive hand condition. So it's still very present. It's still very good. Just kind of does what it does, and it's pretty hard to interact with. Miku and Yotsuba also have lists that are playable, but we've already talked about 3 Quints lists. I think that we need to move on to a different set. So that's the stuff that's kind of new. Let's talk about some old stuff. We've got Hololive. 4 decks, I think that most people would consider still pretty relevant. You have X Marine, right? So usually 8 salvage, but you'll see other level 1 combos with it sometimes. You have Kanata Marine, which is playing obviously the Marine top end, but a very different mid game. The 8 standby list, which is not as relevant, but still does exist. And Gura, which was the most prevalent list for a long time, kind of fell off in popularity and has kind of surged back, especially in a post-ban environment. You're seeing a lot more Gura than you used to. I'm still very much on the Gura. Like, I know that this is old news to anyone who's been watching our stuff. I'm still on the Gura. I think that 2 Gura is still crazy. You can almost guarantee your burn, so 2114, 2114 for 5 stock with an Ame on the board is still just unbelievably efficient. I think that alone keeps Gura very relevant, but it also gets to play a Soul Trigger heavy package with a Kali combo that's going to get what it needs very, very often. Gets through deck 1 extremely consistently, like almost always hits its refresh point. You have a very good healer. You have a very optionable level 2 game. There's a lot you can do at level 2. You have off finishers that are good at level 3. There's very little that Gura does poorly. Like, literally the only thing that's holding Gura back at all is that you only play 2 Gura. You were only putting 2 Guras on the board most of the time anyway. So as long as you are attentive and making sure that you don't lose your Guras, you will still get a Gura game together. And I think that's still extremely valuable and extremely competent into especially a meta where we're looking at some more defensive tools. So having the high ceiling, and also like you have your own things to disrupt defensive tools, right? You have bounce, you have all this other stuff. So still a 50 good card archetype in Gura that I still think 50 good cards is just the best archetype. Like, at this point, like, instead of trying to play a very specific package, just play 50 good cards. You're never upset about what you draw because all of your cards are good. 8 salvage is very similar. 50 good cards. It is more teched out. It's a little less dictating its own game plan to the board than Gura is. Gura just kind of does whatever it does and tries not to care about what's happening across the way. 8 salvage a little more interactive, tries to shut off the opponent a little bit more, but still at the end of the day, you're looking at a 4 stock Marine finisher that still has a very good damage floor and a bunch of extra tools for decompression and opening up lanes and denying opponents, and still extremely good. The 8 salvage list. I know you, Brayden, are still very much on the 8 salvage list.
Yeah, I'm still pretty high on it. I think Botan is a absolutely insane card that can be flexed into so many different ways, especially in a list like this that can generate that many resources to pay for it. Shuffleback 3 can be just a super underrated tool to help fuel a finisher.
Well, there are plenty of games where your opponent's deck is small. They're 1 out of 4. Well, you Botan, now they're 1 out of 7. So you're going to stick, at least a 3, probably a burn 2 in there somewhere, plus a refresh point. Like, that's 6 damage in 1 lane.
Yep. You sit there and you solve the puzzle. What's the best way to finish my opponent? The resources I have.
Yeah. And that also gives it, and I can understand why people think that that gives it a leg up over a Gura, is because it does have a little bit more finesse to it. Instead of doing the one thing it does extremely, extremely well, it can finesse a finisher with its tools and gain whatever specific advantage it needs to win a specific matchup or to close from a specific deck state. So I totally get why people are really excited about Maureen still. But like Maureen and Gura, I think those are like clearly the two main archetypes in Hololive. You'll still see Kanata with the Maureen. Kanata, still that big board level 3 combo that comes down at 2, bunch of resource generation. Basically, if you pull off Kanata, you have Maureen. Just straight up every time.
Kanata can lean a little harder into that tap counter and defensive tools a little bit more than, say, like the 8 salvage even can.
Yep. But it's also more susceptible to that anti-change counter the same way that Ichika is. The other list, the 8 standby list, definitely dropped off in its relevance because of the ban. We talked about this a week ago, so not going to harp on it too much. I still dig the 8 standby list. I think it's really cool. I think it's a very unique archetype.
Luna's an incredibly strong card still.
Oh, yeah. And it's a thing that people are teching for less and less, too. So if you don't have a way to get rid of the Luna, you just have to deal with the Luna the whole game now. So it might be a more friendly meta for 8 standby Hololive, but at the end of the day, losing that double drop search top check Mio that's still a challenge for them. Like that's still a very difficult thing to lose. So not having that anymore has definitely affected its consistency.
Yep. And though you do bring up a good point with the drop off in popularity of Chainsaw Man, as well as a lower representation rate of Seven Deadly Sins, there are less zone bombs to deal with Luna in the format.
So we might see 8 standby work its way back in a little bit. I could see someone making it as their tech play. I don't know if we'd see it as a tech play at Worlds necessarily, or like a meta call at Worlds, but I could see someone taking it to Summerfest at least and having a good deal of success with it.
Yep.
Looking at kind of the whole overall, I definitely like the flexibility you see with Kanata Marine. And I think that that's going to be something that's worthwhile, especially into a unsolved Nikkei meta. As things continue to adjust and change, having a deck that can flex to whatever it needs to, in regards to offensive, defensive, or just kind of be able to play into the weakness of your opponent's deck, or play into a defensive build or tap counter kind of thing. Being able to have that kind of flexibility, I think, is really important. I think we see some of that with the Choice Pants and 8-door builds as well. Those two are very much trying to go on their paths to their endgame and less responsive to their opponent, but they often have tools that can play into some of those different things as well. I think 8 Standby is the most rigid of the 4 that we've talked about so far, where it's trying to do its own game plan versus worrying about the game plan of its opponent. And I think that the loss of that drop searcher does drop it down a tier in regards to between the differences between them. But I do think that if you don't have the answers to that 8 standby board, it can be very oppressive.
So let's talk about some of the other stuff that got hit in the most recent ban list. It's been around for a while. Everyone's a little bit tired of talking about Mirin, but slime is still a thing. We saw kind of a even split between like the salvage Mirin and the 8 pants Rimuru Mirin in slime after the ban, but it definitely dropped off heavily in representation after being the most represented thing in all of BCS. Brandon, you're our resident slime player. What's the prognosis for Mirin at Worlds and into Summerfest?
Sure. So Mirin lost a little bit of consistency, losing the Bonder to it, which also kind of took out its initial, essentially level 1 game. Depending on whatever build you had, you either were running an off level one to be able to augment the Mirin. If you're playing into the suite of off finishers, there's not a finisher combo that works well into Mirin, as well as generate resources early. So you have to kind of play into the almost double advantage station with the suite of off finishers to close out the game, which you have a decent number of them, which allow some flexibility in that regard. But there's now a bit more openness as to what that suite of possibilities could be. We're still seeing 8 pants builds. We're seeing salvage pants builds, which I think is going to be probably the more common of the two, where we see the Rimuru that's more like the previous Coronet from Hololive, where you can stack on one lane a bunch of reverses to be able to get all these search targets in. And so that way you can essentially compress your deck after your combo turn to allow you just that extra bit of compression, really kind of trying to lean into that compression heavily in the process. So I think that that's something we probably will see going forward with Slime, is trying to play into that just double advantage, compress the deck to get an extra cancel or two to be able to close out your opponent that way. That finisher, I would argue, is also on the smaller side because it's a bunch of off finishers, so you're not like really trying to close from outside of level 3, but you're also essentially trying to get to level 3 second in a lot of ways too. So
You still have hexproof. You're still going to be a relevant deck.
Yep. Being able to deny like the Nikkei 3-0 event so it can't target you is pretty huge.
The thing I'm always going to go back to with Slime is that it still doesn't have a real finisher. And I think into a meta where more powerful finishers in both the Nikkei and Bunny Girl are on the horizon, more decks that don't care as much about the Mirin board, right? Even if they crash the Mirin board, they don't really care all that much because they think they can still close you. Like if I'm playing Nikkei or if I'm playing Bunny Girl, I'm just gonna do what I gotta do to get Slime into 3-0 while I stay at 2 and say, kill me. Because I don't think you can. Like that's always gonna be the play into Slime until Slime can consistently close. Slime plays this compression game, right? It lives and dies by staying compressed and you'll to some extent playing good Weiss. But the fact that it will pretty regularly need 2 turns to actually close a game, I think is a big problem in a world where more powerful finishers are entering the top of the meta.
Yeah, I still think it'll always be good just because it has like Miron is just still a very strong combo. So it will be around, it'll be relevant. A lot of people still have it. Popular franchise as well. Being able to play both defensively and sort of playing into this very toolboxy top end, I think is still very strong. Similar to how a salvage Hololive likes to toolbox its top end, it just actually has Marin to really make it what it is. Whereas Slime, the Benimaru, is effectively like Marin, except the burn is less consistent. It can be both better or it can just be worse. One of the big matchup things is that I think that Slime's compression is like the perfect amount for Bunny Girl to actually just really nail you with the Icy Tail. It's like not hyper compressed like you would see from like a memory like Saikano Presaya massive memory compression deck or something, or Yotsuba, but it's not uncompressed where the Icy Tail whiffs like something like a Kanata would after one combo or something.
Moving on to Overlord. We wouldn't be talking about Overlord if it didn't pull off 2 wins post-ban. Its representation has cratered. Spy Family had more tops post-ban than Overlord did, but Overlord turned 4 of its tops into 3 top 4s and 2 wins. Still clearly relevant, at the top tables in the late rounds, but its representation has dropped precipitously. The ban list hit it pretty hard. Everyone's clutching anti-change counter. And sometimes if you're Overlord, you just die. Because it takes multiple turns for your stuff to come together, and sometimes you just die before you get a chance to do your thing. Like, Overlord has a bevy of weaknesses. It just does. I don't think it's particularly arguable at this point that it doesn't have those weaknesses, but it still has that one big strength, which is Eins. If Eins comes together, it's gonna kill you. It does have a couple of things that run around in this meta that kind of directly stop it. Mirin, for example, and they're still present enough, I think, in a Summerfest environment that Overlord will very likely run into one of its hard counters at some point during Swiss. But when it comes together, Overlord's top end is as good as any in this meta. It's still one of the best top ends in the format if it all comes together. But a lot of things kind of still have to go right for Overlord to get its thing. It has to trigger its bar. It has to not just eat 7 and die. It still has to something has to go right for Overlord to win. Whereas you can kind of manufacture wins with some of these other top tier lists, Overlord, you still need to catch one break. And if you catch no breaks, you just lose. That's kind of where I'm at on Overlord.
The big thing with Eins, I think the one thing holding Eins in is probably very similar to how Kanata does, is that this big early play thing comes down and the combo heals. Healing at 2 like that is really, really important for decks like Kanata and Overlord that try to like do these 2-turn combo effects or maintain this board state. Overlord does have the tools, it just needs a way to get all of them all the time. And that's probably the big consistency thing. That's what they hit in the ban list as compared to just hitting the 1-1 like the Japanese list did. So it's all a consistency game. If you're confident that you can get the 2 turns of Eins off, I still think Overlord is one of the best payoffs in the format, especially with Slime being as down as it is. But again, it's a consistency problem.
And I think you nailed that, Brayden. I think the less Slime you see, the more Overlord will do well. You will see as well. Overlord, I think also being able to just blow up boards is also a really huge factor too, especially into a potentially heavy standby meta. To be able to effectively just completely nuke a board and makes it harder for that player to rebuild and harder for the resources used in that thing. Sure, can you see it coming? Absolutely. Can you play around it a little bit? Absolutely. But at the same time, I think just the threat of it changes how you play the game too. And I think that changing of how you play the game also is worth a mention here as well. That you have to adapt your deck and your game plans for this deck to exist.
Yeah, and I think that's why Overlord maintains such high presence, is that it adds pressure not while you're like in the tournament, it adds pressure in the deck builder.
Yeah.
A lot of these decks don't actually like give you like standby in general puts pressure on you as a player when you're building and sleeving a deck, but that is a different pressure than when you're actually playing the game. Overlord has one of the most commanding presences in the deck builder, and it's something you just got to be ready for. It's a matchup check, effectively, is what it turns into.
Final thing we want to talk about, SDS Hendrickson. Hendrickson. Relevant before the ban, relevant after the ban, definitely took a hit post-ban. Was the 4th most represented thing in Top Cut post-ban. Less consistent with its top end because it has lost access to some of its tools. However, it's still burn 4. It's still burn 4 with Mocha 1. And that's still good, and that's still going to close a lot of games.
The threat of stock swap Fumio while you're actually playing is just something you got to be ready for.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Stock swap Fumio you can afford while also playing a very powerful finisher. Like a high volume finisher that also can decompress. Still scary. Like, I don't know if we have to go into too much more about SDS, frankly, because it's still doing the same thing it's always done, this Hendrickson list. And if it can decompress you, like, Hendrickson's going to kill you. It has a 53% chance of killing you from 2-4 if you're 6 out of 30, which frankly are absurd odds. So you have to play around the stock swap, which in turn affects you not only having to fix your deck, but also the resources you spend to fix your deck are resources you can't use on your finisher now. So it forces you to put yourself in a position where Hendrickson isn't just going to kill you.
And I think it also benefits decks that have top ends that are lighter in resources, because then they can avoid some of that counterplay while still being able to play their game without too much flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Dropping stock decks that can afford to drop stock on heals, drop stock on bigger board state. Because the other big thing with Seven Deadly Sins is that it's not vying for board for most of the game. Like it's dropping a 6/5, and then an early play healer are like the two bodies that you really have to like worry about, and they're not the biggest threats in terms of board state. If you can wall out those things at the respective levels, like it effectively turns into a resource race in who can finish who first.
So all that being said, the three of us have put together kind of mini tier lists featuring each of these 7 sets. And this is where we have them. They're on the screen now. Brayden, going to start with you. What does your tier list look like and why?
Yep. So the top of my list, we've got Bunny Girl as the first slot. I think this is just the most consistent 1K1 deck. It has the best kill range and has the best way to like utilize stock and everything. After that, it's going to be 8 Standby Nino. It's the body deck. It's the wall. In terms of the best defensive tools, the best deck at holding board. It has finisher options as well. So it's a standby deck that's doing everything effectively. After that, it kind of opens up pretty wide. So we go down to the next tier. And I think this tier is absolutely massive. I think there are a few of these that can potentially move up depending on how the format shakes out. But we have stuff like Chloe, 8 Salvage Hololive, just these massive toolboxes. We've got the other Quince lists. We've got Nikkei lists. Just a bunch of stuff that all has the potential to move up. Freerin, Bochi the Rock, a lot of these decks just all have the potential to do good things, but they're just a little bit shy. And then under that, we have a whole bunch of the other ones, a bunch of good 1K1 piles. Shauna is just these rogue decks that try and fit in other Hololive piles because some guy's going to show up with the rogue Hololive pile, and you just got to know what he's got access to.
We're going to talk more about kind of the rest of the meta next time, 2 weeks from now. Brandon, talk about your tier list.
So here's my tier list. Again, yeah, Bunny Girl top slot. I think Bunny Girl is the deck to beat currently. But I do think that there is some decent competition with its other standby counterparts. I agree with you, Brayden, that 8 standby Quince makes the top cut here. But I did throw in the Nikkei list as well. I think there's going to be a lot less slime around this season, so I'd expect the deck to do better. Partly because I think that 3-0 event in that deck can be a problem to deal with some sets, having that essentially free tap counter in play and online for basically whenever you need it, I think is a important thing along the way, especially having it active to come into play into level 3. It's like you don't have necessarily to be level 3 yet to have the conditions ready for the tap counter. So when you do get to 3, you can actually potentially tap down the last lane and potentially save the game in a sense. I also think that you're playing along with that early play, being able to step over boards. I think you're going to be able to get that kind of extra potential damage in, and otherwise it's a relatively standardized set. I think there's potential here for that to be in that kind of slot. Similarly, top of A tier is slime. I think we're both in agreement with that. I do have the next one being that pants build, the pants top end, regardless of whatever that level 1 combo people end up choosing to be. I'm not sure that that makes a whole lot of difference. I think that top end puts it there. Essentially, that consistency and that damage push at the end, I think, is going to be very important and impactful. I think that having that consistent top end is actually going to be very huge. I equate it a lot to Escanor in that sense, in regards to the amount of damage that it could potentially deal with potentially even less counterplay. So that's why I have that there. I do have Overlord next, which I think is just increased from the lack of slime, or less of slime. I think a lot of slime is going to be shifted off for some of the new stuff coming out. Is it still going to be prevalent? Yes. As prevalent as it has been? I don't think so. So because of that, I think Overlord increases, just because of that board disruption tool, especially into a standby or standby adjacent meta. I think the more important standby is, the more Overlord and its board break abilities are valued. And so I think it can get away with more. In that similar vein, I think Kanata's next. I think Kanata's going to have some decent play into some of those things as well. Getting that big board early, as well as being able to sit on that board for an extended period of time, I think is important. Being able to build up on stock into a more heavy or dense quints meta, I think, is important as well. So that's partly why I put Kanata ahead of Gura. Gura can do a lot of the similar things, maybe a little bit more explosive top end, but I think Kanata can play into the stock game and play a little bit more defensively, whereas Gura has to kind of go for the kill. SDS, very similar position with the Gura to be able to do everything it needs to do. It has the potential for finesse at a top end to be able to manipulate your opponent's deck to how you want it to get to what you're trying to do for closing the game. I just think that if games are going to be rushed, which is a potential here, that SDS may struggle a little bit more for getting the exact number of resources it needs to close a game. Especially with tap counter in play, I think that SDS has to be a little bit more cautious in that regard. So I think we're going to see less SDS in that process. The rest of that top line is kind of the good stuff in regards to like having a lot of access in regards to cards and card quality, and well as just having a very solid or very generic finisher to be able to help wrap up that little top end there. The last two I have in the B tier. I think that Nikkei one can also slide into A tier if we actually get a fully solved list. The lists I've seen have been pretty decent and pretty successful in regards to that, but I think that there's enough variance in some of those sets that we're going to see a little less representation of that, especially with it being a trios format coming up into this season, where if you have options to play some of the other decks, I think that you're going to choose consistency over the high risk, high reward. But I could also see that argument on the flip side as well. So I have it at the top of B. But if we get a really consistent list, I think we could see that spike up really quickly. And then I round out with that 8 Standby Hololive at the end of B tier. I think that while it is a solid deck, especially with all the other options of Hololive, I don't see this one as being it, especially when you have other standby options on the table too. I think that it is a decent choice, but I don't think it is going to be one seeing the representation needed to kind of boost this up higher, but also seeing the consistency that it might need, especially if Overlord does exist. But that's my tier list. What about you, Colton?
Mine is pretty similar to yours, Brayden, with like probably one significant exception. I do have Bunny Girl as the top of A tier right now. I don't think we have an S tier right now. Will we have an S tier by the end of this, or by the, I don't even want to say end of season. Will we have one by say June? We very well might. I think there are a lot of things that still need to kind of be played out. Is Bunny Earl going to have the kind of meta share where it's going to be a quarter of Top Cut every single time? Will 8 standbys board be able to hold into this meta? I think that there's a lot of stuff that comes down early. A lot of good cards at level 2 that can disrupt the 8 standby board. And I don't know how well 8 standby is going to hold its board in this current environment. It might hold up extremely well. It might not. But if, Nikkei's early play can come down and shoot a 2/2 to the top of the 8 standby deck, that could be a problem for 8 standby. I still think Hololive is really good. I just think the power of 50 good cards is not to be sneezed at. I'm still on the Gura. I only have it nominally above 8 salvage. I think they're both extremely good. For a lot of the same reasons and a couple of different reasons that we've talked about earlier. Both extremely consistent. Gura has the super high ceiling. Mirin, extremely consistent and has all of these decompression and other tools to kind of extend its range. Nikkei is my big question mark. I don't think we've decided collectively as a player base what Nikkei looks like. I think right now they're leaning towards the standby top end, but I think that there's a very real possibility that people come off of that. I still think the bar is the most dangerous thing, and I think Dorothy is probably the most consistent thing right now. It wouldn't shock me to see Dorothy be the best Nikkei deck early in the season, and then eventually as people solve bar or people find ways to get more advantage out of standby, that one of those takes over. I still think that there will be some people with rogue bar lists who are very dangerous. And then the rest of it is, it's a lot of the old guard, right? I think SDS and Slime take a step back with the new stuff. I think that the rest of Quints is just a step down from 8 standby right now. But I absolutely could see 8 salvage in particular. I think move up a little bit. I don't think it jumps up into A tier, but I could see it moving around and being good. Kanata is kind of down here for the same reason Ichika is. I think anti-change counter is a big deal. And the ability to just shut off an entire lane of Kanata pretty consistently because there's nothing Kanata can do to stop it I think it's a significant weakness. Overlord's super inconsistent, and I think 8 standby Hololive is really missing that drop search. That's it for us. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Brayden, for being on today. We're going to run this back in 2 weeks. We're going to talk about everything else in this meta, and I'm sure we'll probably talk a little bit about Worlds as well, the World Championship that's coming up. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.